All right. I am just going to get started and I'm going to immediately hand it off to Jen and we're going to go through. We got a little PowerPoint presentation. We'll ask questions along the way. Feel free to ask us questions. This is definitely a draft form. So we'll want to, we've got a few specific things that we're going to ask you guys, but definitely throw things out if there's any thing weird on your guys' side or if you've been chatting with your communities. Yeah, and then we'll kind of go from there. Jen Hester, ready to go.
Thanks. And thanks to Lisa for being here. Lisa, a couple months ago, gave us a draft of a policy and we kind of digested what was there as well as we compared to other communities and to figure out what is our vision. And this is kind of just a very rough draft of what we're presenting to you. There's a couple of things that we know we're weak on and we want your feedback on. So definitely appreciate you guys being here tonight. Kind of first to go off, we're just going to walk through the city's draft naming policy. It's basically a playbook for how we will name or rename any city-owned building, facility, park, trail, public place. The goal is to keep the process consistent, fair, and definitely rooted in Soldotna's community values. First, why do we even need a naming policy? Names matter. They help people navigate our community. They reflect our culture and history. And sometimes they honor important people or events. A clear policy takes the guesswork and the politics out of it, and it helps us make thoughtful, community-minded decisions. This first section is really, it's kind of a cut and paste from the draft policy that we created. And the first section is directly from number 1, purpose. Here. And as we're looking at this, we also wanted to just know, what do we have? What is this inventory of Soldotna-owned facilities that are already named? So the Joyce C. Carver Library is named after our first librarian, the woman who helped start the public library system in Soldotna. She borrowed books from all around the country to get us started. You guys are sitting in the Patty Burdick's council chambers. She was our city clerk for 30 years here in Soldotna. Fred Meyer Pavilion's named after Fred Myers because they donated money. Farnsworth Park and Parker Park donated from land trusts. Three Friends Dog Park comes from Martha Brewer, Dean Brinley, and Alice Puster. So those names are on the sign at Three Friends Dog Park. And then there's Rotary Park with Rotary Club. While we were diving into the draft that Lisa gave us, we also looked at communities from around Alaska, as well as mostly the Pacific Northwest, similar-minded communities. On the left-hand side is just basic topics, what are important in some of these other naming policies, and that helped guide us. We sometimes found things that we really liked. Some of the verbiage is almost directly from something else, and there are some things that we kind of had ideas about prior to even diving into other communities' naming policies, and it was nice to see some of the reflection of what we had thought in other policies. And if you have questions on something else, we do have drafts. We printed off drafts of all of these policies we can dive into. This is, if we were to go to the draft policy, this is the second section, kind of scope and definitions. So what this applies to. This applies to anything the city owns or controls: buildings, parks, trails, ball fields, rooms inside buildings. It's basically any public place with a name. We also define things like sub-facilities, which are smaller places inside a larger asset. Anchorage did a pretty good job. I mean, they did actually a great job with traditional indigenous place names. So we borrowed a little bit of their definition and made it our own for the Kenai Peninsula. And we also touched on honorary renaming. And what does that mean to recognize something without altering the official addressing of it? And then this goes into the third section. So for guiding principles, when we're thinking about naming something, the priority is to choose names that have historical, cultural, or geographic meaning. We look at location, natural features, and traditional indigenous names whenever possible. One big thing is, as a general rule, we avoid naming major assets after people. If someone is honored, it's usually better suited for a room, a field, a feature, or something smaller within a larger facility. And if you want me to go slower and kind of go more in depth, I don't know how much you had a chance to review the draft. I just didn't want to read the draft to you, but we can stop and dive into one section a little bit stronger than another. We also looked at criteria for naming. Proposed names need to fit with those guiding principles. They should be relevant, not confusing, and appropriate for public use. If someone wants to name something after a person or organization, they need to show the connection to Soldotna and what their contributions have been. There are a few guardrails, like generally waiting 3 years after someone has passed away and avoiding changing long-standing historic names without strong support. And then thinking about criteria for specifically parks and recreation facilities. So this is your wheelhouse. Parks, trails, and recreation facilities have their own section because these tend to be named most often. Indigenous names and natural features are strongly encouraged. We also outline donation-based naming, basically when someone has made a significant financial or long-term contribution that justifies naming rights. This might be the section that we need most input from as far as what does this process look like. Um, so here's where kind of the rubber meets the road. Naming can be initiated by the mayor, city council, or a community member. Whoever's proposing the name needs to provide the background and the justification, where the name comes from, how it fits the criteria, and who it impacts. Once a proposal is submitted, a public naming panel gets formed. It's a 5-member group that includes people with knowledge of local history and culture, plus folks familiar with the community character. If we're naming something for Parks and Rec, for example, the panel also includes representation from that department's commissioner board. We are thinking the same would be true for the airport commission if someone wanted to name the airport, or if someone wanted to name something from public works, if it was streets and maintenance, they would need representation from that department. Oh, go ahead.
I had a question about that. Are these 5-person panels, are these like one-off groups that are selected based on the specific request, or are these people that we have already somehow designated ahead of time, or how is that?
Yeah, everybody does it a little bit different. If you're a bigger community, sometimes you have like a set group that just kind of lives and works together on these. We probably would imagine that we would put, I mean, how many times have we named something? You know, might be once every 10 years. And we would put this group together as needed. There was conversation on whether to go like, does the mayor appoint them? Does city manager appoint them? Do we just like find them off the street? And so there could be some dialogue on that, on how to, but this town's small enough. Like if you're like, we were kind of talking the other day, like if you're super stoked on like historical naming and like geographical stuff, or just there's probably only one of you or two of you in Soldotna, and so it might be easy to kind of pull these people, especially looking at members of the historical society, anybody from the college, like these kind of groups that already have some of this sort of background or knowledge.
Yeah, that seemed like one of the kind of least structured pieces of the draft that I'd read. So, okay. Thanks, Joel.
What would you do?
As far as identifying the people, I'm not really sure. Like you said, I wouldn't even know where to start or who to ask. I think it would make sense kind of on a case by case situation. You wouldn't want the same person doing all of them. But I think we definitely want to have some kind of a structure as to who approves those 5 people. I don't know if that's the manager and the mayor, or the parks director if it's a trail, or but I think that would make sense to have like a final stamp of approval from somebody in an administrative role here.
Yep. Okay. Cool.
I agree with you totally. And I think that 5 members is good when you get, I mean, you could go to 7, but then you'd just be having more people to have a discussion. So you'd have to have a 3-2. Yeah. And so at first I thought it should be 7, but who appoints them is really important. I think it should be a varied background and not all from one place. I think that's probably the most important thing. I like the idea of going to the college and the historical society, because some of those people have been over there for a long time. And that you could appoint, community members too, for that matter. But I think that would be important to have somebody either from the Historical Society or the college, or, um, yeah, and I have some other questions, but since we're on that, I'll leave it there.
And we do dive into like kind of who should be on that here. I don't know if we have a slide, but there is in section 6.2, kind of like we would hope that there'd be some sort of historians, anthropologists, archaeologists, somebody, uh, Alaska Native cultural advisor, maybe somebody familiar with, the homesteading crew or council members that have been here for a while, um, and not just, somebody that's been here for a week and then that wants to change the names.
Well, and that brings up an interesting point. Like, would I apply to be on this panel or would I be asked to be on this panel? Because in one sense, you could have a lot of people who are interested in making decisions like this that you would make an application and you weed out who you want or who you don't want. Or if it's the mayor, whoever says, I'd like you to be on this panel, and then they say, no, thank you, or whatever, then you have to accept or not. So that is an interesting piece of that as well, is how do we identify people? Because I think a lot of people might self-select themselves, whether it's people from the college or historical societies, things like that. Those people make the most sense to me, but how are we going to find them if they're not necessarily coming forward of their own volition? It might be, something to think about.
Yeah, Lisa. Vice Mayor Parker. sorry.
Specifically on this, the public naming panel, I think it should be something that they are appointed, and they can be appointed by the mayor, but they have to be confirmed by the council, like is done with you guys, planning commission, everybody, so that if there's somebody that's appointed, that you look at it and you're like, that doesn't make sense that that person's there. You know, you have that check and balance. Going away from this specifically, when I brought this up months ago, the reason I brought it up is because there's lots of people talking about wanting to name facilities here in Soldotna. And we're also looking at putting some Denina names associated with some of our facilities here in town, facilities and parks, and have been working with Kenichi Tribe on that. But so then I asked the city manager and the city clerk, do we have a policy for a naming policy in the city? And they're like, no, we don't have one. And so as we continue to grow, and particularly as the sports complex grows, there's going to be lots of folks coming forth saying, I want to name it after Jamie because, he was a great golfer. So let's name the golf course after Jamie. So anyway, I mean, we've had people who want us to name the stage at Soldotna Creek Park. We've had multiple facilities out at the sports complex where people are like, we need to name it after so-and-so, but we don't have a policy. And so that's why I brought this up, why it came forth. And when we did this initially, I also said it needs to come to this group for vetting before it goes to the council, because you are the Parks and Rec Advisory Group, and this is something that would be coming before you, or should come before you. And then Joel said, we need to take more time so that they've got not just, 10 minutes to talk about it, look at it, and move on. So a little background behind the why, and so.
Yeah, thanks.
To say, does Kenai have a city policy in place?
I don't think so. I think the closest we could find was Anchorage, and then out of state. is what
Okay.
we were finding.
Yeah, one thing that I noticed, there's a lot of facilities that are going in, there's the hospital in Kenai, the medical centers and stuff. And they run with the theme of the, native, I don't know, names and stuff that they utilize. And it doesn't, I would hate to see everything named after a certain way, because that doesn't represent a lot of the community that comes together that for different reasons. But that was one of my concerns and questions is what Kenai is doing, because somebody's naming all these buildings.
Yeah, I think a lot of the facilities that you might be talking about are actually owned by the Kenichi tribe. And so, private organizations can do whatever they want, versus, municipalities trying to make sure everybody's, has a seat at the table for something like this.
If I could make a follow-up, when I read through this whole thing and I wrote down, well, not a lot of comments, some, I would prefer to have, if we name it after, an organization, the Kenichi or whatever, I think that should be trails, parks, and rooms. I think a building that supports all types of people, youth, and old age and young age, and different people from different ethnicities. So I would rather have not a building, a big building named after any kind of a tribe at this point. I would like that to be included somehow. We have them included on trails and parks and so forth, and I think that's really important. And rooms within a building that make that room special. So that's where I looked at that. Um, I think it would be important to look at the natives and the homesteaders and people who'd been here a long time and have a variety of people. I think it would be really important to have a student there, either a college student or a high school senior who maybe was there and had ideas to give and maybe not a vote. I don't know how you would feel about that. And so I believe in including young people, and not the younger the better, but I do think that's important, either via college or senior in high school, probably not anybody earlier than that, so. But I really like the work in here. It was really interesting to read. My computer was not beneficial today, though it really angered me.
I assumed as I was reading through this that when we're talking about a naming panel, the people who are going to, if it's a 5-person panel, those are the people who are going to vote. But I would assume there'll be lots of other people involved in the conversation that they might have, right? So basically, if you have a panel of 5 people who are going to vote, and we get together and we want to name this thing after this, we'll come and we'll give our pitch or a proposal for why, the reasons, and everyone can kind of discuss it. And then those people go away and the panel sits down like almost like jurors deliberating, and then they'll ultimately make the vote or make the recommendation. But I do like the idea of having youth. I think any potential to get youth involved in local politics is usually a good thing most of the time, especially when it comes just to ownership of the community. So college students and or upper high school students does make sense to at least be involved in the process and have a say. Not that I want Gen Z weirdo names for everything, but there might be some good ideas out there.
Mhm.
I was just thinking about when we were looking for a name for Three Friends Dog Park. And it's just a dog park, so you wouldn't think it would be that hard, but we needed something that was, everybody would know, but yet it honored the three friends. And so anyway, I'm just saying that, there's more involved in it than it sounds. And it's so important that it lasts the lifetime, because it's going to be around for a long time. So I just wanted to say that.
I also think it'd be interesting. I mean, you said lots of people have ideas of what they want to do. The first thing I thought when you said that is like, are any of them good? Like, are these good ideas or are they bad ideas that we're trying to weed out? So we're trying to put a process in place to say, yeah, let's not go for that. Or are they great ideas that we want to utilize? So we need a process in place to approve them. Is that kind of which way are we thinking there?
They're good ideas, and with the recommendations from the Kenichi on the naming of facilities, those are good ideas as well. But before we start jumping and doing stuff, it's better to have a policy in place so there's consistency from one council to the next council, because this public naming panel will make a recommendation, but it still has to come back to city council for final approval before the name is.
Yeah, like Three Friends Dog Park.
based on this policy.
Yeah, which is a good example because like these three friends donated some money to help build the dog park, and then it just got named. And I mean, I don't think it ever went to council. It's part of Aspen Park, which is the real name of that facility, the whole park. But if that went through this policy, they would submit the name, the panel would get to put together, you know, either administration or council would approve the panel. They would look at, does this particular area have a cultural known name, like Solteshi has a, sort of this historical name of this Black Ridge Axe, and so that was kind of, that makes sense there. But does Aspen Park have that, or does it have a historic like homestead, or is there history to Aspen Park before it just becomes Three Friends Dog Park, and just that's what it is for 100 years. So there would just be like some checks and balances. And then once that panel was like, yeah, we did our research, we listened to a lot of public input, we think this is a good name, it fits the community, it builds community, it meets all this criteria, then it would go to council for another public engagement opportunity, and then council would approve it. So it's not like we're going out trying to find names, but we're also like, that panel in our sort of thought process would do some research and kind of dive into that particular park or that trail or that building and figure out, how did we get Parker Park? What's the history behind that? Should it be changed to something else?
Well, when I went through the guiding policy, I looked at the number 3 natural features associated with the site, excuse me, including, but not limited to geographical, geological, anthropological, and native flora and fauna. I think that could be used in some areas on trails or whatever. And then number 5 is a general rule: the city avoids naming a primary asset after a person. And when individuals are honored, preferences given to sub-facilities, and I like that wording in there. On number 4, eligibility, I think it needs to be relevant to the city's history. I like all that information that you have in that as well on general honoring and naming. And then underneath that, I know will be suitable for public use with our name. I'm not even concerned about that. I just put a little bubble next to it. But I do think it might be important to, if you're proposing to honor an individual in any way, whether it's at the building or at a trail, I think it's important to identify the individuals or organizations' connection to Soldotna and their nation of contributions. And a contribution doesn't have to be money. It can be somebody whacking down stuff or a tree that needs to come down, and we get permission to take it down. So, and I like that number in the 4.1, right before 4.2, renaming any primary asset within 20 years. I mean, you have a lot of amazingly good information in here. The one area I wasn't sure about was 4.2, where it said down the bottom, it talks about when renaming a park, trail, recreation facility, additional considerations apply. And so when you're talking about the amount of money that people donate, at the very bottom, it says a demonstrable, significant, and sustained contribution to the community or to parks and recs over many years. I'm not sure about that consideration. I think it's important, but I think it'll be interesting to look at how that's applied. And I'm sorry, I'm an English teacher. I was, I'm not anymore. And then prohibited names, commercial, promotional names unless part of a council-approved naming rights. And I'd have to know more about that. I put down, please explain. And then in number 6, procedures, the 3rd bullet down, I put down background and support for the proposed name, including all research or evidence of how the proposal meets Section 4 criteria. I think it all goes back to that. So, but I think this is a wonderful process. I do like in number 6.2, the fact that those familiar with community character have a passion for peacemaking and community building. That's what it is, compassion and community building. When you pull that group together, you really make a strong um, feeling of the people who are on that community, and people feel like they can go and say, hey, I don't like that. And so you write it down and you say, why don't you like it? And do you think we really should change it, and why? And if you get enough people, then you can change it. So, and then I better be quiet or I'll get kicked out.
This is all great. Let's flip through a couple more slides, and then I got a couple questions for you guys. But keep asking the questions for us too. We've kind of backtracked and gone forward a few different times, so that's fine.
And I think that's good because you guys are right in line with what we were thinking.
Yep.
And it's all interrelated. So Eric really kind of touched on a lot of this too, as well as some of Jamie's other comments. How does this review process look? And again, this is something that Joel and I still haven't hashed out. We need more feedback and more guidance on. So as far as the panel reviews the proposals, gathers public input, what does that public input look like? It could include a public hearing and comment period. And then that panel would write up a recommendation. After that, the recommendation goes to city council. The council introduces the naming resolution, holds another public hearing, and then they make their final decision. Within that process, if it's a Parks and Rec asset, then in that process, we were thinking that again, a public hearing would come before you, or it would come before you if it was one of the assets in your purview.
So a name could actually, in theory, depending on what we decide, right? There could be a panel that does like an open house at the library to be like, hey, this is a name that somebody wants to name this city hall building after somebody, right? So there's one public opportunity for people to chat. Then city hall is a bad example because it's not parks, but then it could go to the Parks and Rec board, and the panel could be like, hey, this is what we think. This is why we think it. Do you guys, what's your opinion? So that's your second time for public input. And then it would go to council for a third opportunity for public input. That could be too many opportunities. That could muddy things up. Or it could be enough checks and balances that, it doesn't just sneak onto the council agenda without enough awareness from the community. So I don't know, that's kind of one of the questions that we have for the group too. One suggestion, kind of how we're leading this, would be if there's a lot of pushback on the name and the panel, a majority of the panel doesn't or agrees with that pushback and is like, yeah, this name doesn't fit this facility or this trail, then they would give council recommendation that says we don't agree with this name that was nominated or whatever, and that's our opinion, and then council would make their mind up. So it could go through all these steps, and the panel could say like, we don't really like it because of these reasons, and then it would be up to council to decide whether they go with that recommendation or do what they need to do. That's kind of how other people and other communities operate. So
I think what you just outlined as far as the public comment section, I think that seems like the appropriate amount. Because at every time that a group like us are discussing it, there's potential for people to sit in the audience and make public comments. So it seems like an appropriate level of, as you said, checks and balances before something makes it to actually happen. The interesting thing, as we're thinking through all this, I just want to hear the ideas that people have. That's what I'm most I want to know the pitches that people have. But I think because there are multiple opportunities for public comment, if there was significant pushback, it could be if there's only one opportunity, like at a meeting like this, it might be hard to capture how unpopular or unliked it really is. But with the opportunity for multiple public comments on it, you could come back every time. They could be at every meeting. If we have a large contingent of people who do not like this idea, and it gives them ample opportunity to oppose it. That being said, often the room looks like this when we have stuff like this going on. So it would have to be something that was very unpopular to, I'm thinking back to some hockey people we had in the audience when the thing was full. So I think that's the appropriate level of checks before it makes it to actually happening.
If we go to 5 for a consideration like that, is that enough people or should we stay with 7? And the reason I ask is sometimes people can't come or they don't come and attend a meeting like this. And so I don't have the answer to that. I think sometimes, I think 9 or 11, I'm on a 9 board and it's pretty tough. So I would not go any higher than 7 and I would definitely have an odd number. And you all know that why.
What were you finding with some of the other ones? Do you remember?
It varies between 5 and 7 people.
Is the 5 number in here, is that 5 new people in addition to the 2 members of the specific department's commission, or are those 2 people?
I think right now
Part of the
just
5.
5 total.
Okay.
But that's kind of one of the gray areas, depending on what the group, it's 5 community members. Some I think Anchorage had like, you had to have somebody from this community and this community and this community, but then there was just like 5 random at-large seats. It was just people in, maybe not totally affiliated with a historical society or a college or whatever, right? But just an active community member. So, that we could have some more specific hopes and dreams, but Soldotna is a pretty small community, and normally people are wearing 10 different hats. But that is good food for thought.
And I will give this community credit when there is something negative that they don't like. For example, we're closing the field house to turn over the turf, and I posted that on Facebook, like notice, and obviously there's some pushback already within a day and people sharing it. So I think we're good about screaming when we don't like something.
Anything else we wanted to hit on?
I think just kind of what's our next steps? What does this look like? I think we'll take your feedback, and if you have any feedback in the weeks to come, we're here as you digest this, and we'll talk to Lisa and Jeanette and other staff, and we'll try and figure out where to go, what needs to be further refined within our own thoughts. We'll bring this back to you, and it'll be on your agenda, and at that time you can also make amendments to change it. From there, you'll give your recommendation to City Council, and then it'll be before City Council for final approval. And this is for the policy itself. It's not for a specific name. This is just for the draft policy in front of you.
One of the areas, like small thing, but something to think about is like, if you are going to name it after a human or a person, like how long do you wait after they've, can you do it while they're still alive? Do you wait until they've passed away? How long do you wait? Seems like every policy was slightly different. So that's a question back to you guys, like, can you do it immediately? Do you want it to be 10 years, 5 years? We threw out 3 years. It seemed to be kind of middle ground. Something to think about. Think about some of our recent community leaders that have passed away, within the past couple of years, like what seems fair or realistic, or I don't know, or if there's not any opinions.
In my opinion, I don't think it matters if a person is deserving of having something named after him. Then whether it's a day after they pass away or 3 years, I don't think it makes that much difference. Either the community agrees that this person is deserving of having their name on the thing, or they don't. That being said, for the sake of policy, 3 years seems reasonable because if you look at the other policies for the time, as far as like for public comment, we're talking like months. So 3 years kind of lets you handle all that. So, say I passed away tomorrow and someone was like, we'd like to put his name on a thing. Within that 3-year window, it gives you time to go through all these processes, and have, meet all the requirements here in the naming procedures. So 3 years seems reasonable, but like I said, in my opinion, doesn't really make a difference. I think if you're deserving, or if whatever the name is, what the community wants, then that's what should happen. So
I was just going to mention too, had went through and looked at some, and some of them are 5 years. And I mean, there could be negative things that come to light after the person passes away that might not reflect well on, it would give time to pass for people to come forward, or if there were issues. But once you name it, then you're stuck with it. So I think that at 5 years wouldn't even be a bad idea.
I think one of the areas that I interpreted this as is you don't really want to name 4 or 5 different facilities after the same person. We only control public facilities. That doesn't mean, you know, other facilities, borough facilities, state facilities, school district facilities could all be named after the same person. And so if everybody sort of jumped in and named right away without waiting a few years, there could be that too, right? So I think somewhere in here we do have a line that says like it's not ideal, you kind of get one, or we would prefer to only have one just for clarity, right? Like and a lot of that is just like, trying to get somewhere. And if all 3 parks are called Three Friends Dog Parks, then you're like, well, which one am I going to? Hmm. Hmm.
you brought up a good point when you mentioned the borough. I mean, because theoretically, Soldotna, Kenai, and the borough could all name something after the same person. I assume then the borough does not have their own naming policy as well.
Not that we were able to.
Okay, interesting. I also think it's interesting because when we talk about these names in practice, a lot of things are never called in colloquial, conversation. You're not going to refer to, I can't remember the bridge. We don't call that. It's just a bridge, right? It often just comes up on the sign as how you're like, I didn't know Farnsworth Park was called Farnsworth Park for like many years because everyone I knew called it Kitty Park.
Yep.
So there is some sense in that a good name can become the term that we all use, or a kind of lukewarm name is going to not be used by people most of the time anyways. So interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I'm surprised that the borough does not have a policy, because I would think that they get pitched just as much for ideas for stuff for the borough, or does it work differently over there? I don't know.
In the time I was there, we weren't pitched.
Interesting.
So,
Was that handled in the same way as like street naming, possibly?
no,
It wasn't.
No.
Okay. I couldn't remember the borough.
and I was intimately involved in that many years ago.
We worked together, I know.
Painful.
But that is a good point. A lot of policies, or switching points, I guess, sorry, naming things after people, 40, 50, 60 years ago, 100 years ago, or 500 years ago, when we were all like floating boats around the world, you named everything after people. That seems to have shifted, but that's like a big part of this policy too, is like, if everybody in this group and other, the city thinks that like we really should not put barriers on naming things after people, or should we put more barriers on? Like, and that is a big piece or an underlining piece of this policy of like, should we, should that be a priority, less of a priority, something we don't really, I don't know. There's a big conversation piece that we've been talking in circles and yeah, Lisa.
Because this subject is coming up more often, um, as we've done in the past at the city level, we can't wait for other people to take action and do things that impact our city. We have to take that action ourselves. And I would not defer putting a naming policy in place because we do have interest throughout the community for naming a variety of things. So, and if we don't have a policy in place, people can come forth to the council and say, you know, we want to name the Davis Block property down at Soldotna Creek Park after Scott Davis. Because, you know, they used to own it and their family is part of this community. And they could do something like that at this point in time. So I think it's important to put something in place so it's being handled consistently along the way.
Absolutely.
I think in here it's enough of a guardrail to say we try not to name things after people. I think that's enough of a guardrail because in the long run, like I said, if the community decides that someone's deserving or we want to honor them, then you know we're trying not to, but everyone thinks that this is what it should be named. It interestingly, like we call that property you just mentioned the Davis Block property already. That's how we colloquially refer to it. So it makes sense in that sense. But I think if the panel has an understanding that we try to find other names for things that aren't people, then as they get pitched ideas, then they can weed that out at that level and say, well, you know, or like, oh, that's a great idea. That is a person that should be honored in this way, in this space. I think just having the idea of the panel has that guardrail that we try not to do that, but it's not off the table. I think probably enough, especially for the types of people that we're hoping will be on this panel. Like we're talking historians, you know, people who are familiar with the community. I think that would be plenty. I don't think it'll be a problem to say because saying you never name something after a person will come back and bite you as soon as you have a person that we want to name something after, right? So I think in the policy it doesn't need to be that deep.
And my input too is if, you know, like the S, the slogan, like the river. I mean, it has a significance and it says it all without really having to think about it. And this would allow for consistency in the naming policy. That's it's wonderful. Because like you say, you don't have a problem until a problem comes up. And if you're prepared, then that makes it a lot easier. So, but anyway, with consistency of the naming process, definitely think this is a great thing to get started. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Joel Todd Fieldhouse. No criteria. Mhm. Okay. Um, anything else jumping out at you guys? Kind of going down my list and questions.
One thing I did, my daughter went to and her little family went to the turkey trot. And I'm not getting really away from this, but it's part of it. And I mentioned, you know, naming things and stuff. And they just come back from Florida. They've been gone for 20 years and she was born and raised here. And they do turkey trots in Florida and they're big and there's thousands of people that sign up. And so they've been doing them since they were little newbies. And then now they're teenagers. And they made the comments that it was amazing, that the field house was absolutely amazing. And the comment came up as how, I said, well, do you feel that the name of the field house is, she said, and they all conceded that it says everything. It's simple. It says everything. It doesn't have, if that was the George Jones, palace, nobody's going to know what it is. But anyway, that was just the comments and how good that went out and how much they enjoyed it. And I was kind of surprised. I was worried that it would be, kind of more small hometown, but they absolutely loved it. So thank you.
Yeah, I don't think I have any. I mean, I think this, like you were saying, Connie, like that was what we were seeing in some of the other naming policies, like leave the building kind of as the Soldotna Field House, but maybe the court is named after somebody, or maybe the track could be named after somebody, right? Like if it made sense, right? Or the ice rink, but it's still the Soldotna Ice Arena stays as is. There's a couple of rinks up in the valley and one in Anchorage that they change their names every 3 years. Nobody has any idea what they're called. Like I know the Subway Center is still Subway Center. Hasn't been that for 10 years, maybe. I don't know what the name is. So you kind of get into that rabbit hole too if you really start. If those are a little bit different because those are corporate and that's normally some other agreement and normally there's money involved and um, yeah, that's a good question. I think yeah, it was a dome for a hot second, but yeah, I think it was just the, but that I guess that's we kind of we didn't have a policy in place, so we created a working name for this project so that we could go out to bid and raise money and but if we had a policy in place, then after that building was done, then the panel could be put together and be like, okay, well, this is just a working name. What's the real name going to be? And then there would be public process for that, So that's another good example of. Yeah, I mean, I think the idea was like maybe 20 years before you rename something, and then only renaming it if if it's for a real reason, like mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. Cool. So we are, like we said, we're still going to we're going to clean the policy a little bit, talk to some more of our administration team, see if there's anything. There is a section on streets. It's very vague. There's a whole set of rules for that. Renaming things like that when, that's not what this policy is really diving into. This is just facilities and sub-facilities. But we'll get it all cleaned up in the next couple weeks because then it'll be in your next packet, which is January 10th. Your packet will be like the 5th, which means we have like 4 days to turn around this. No problem. But yeah, we'll talk to Annette too and see if she's has any thoughts too.
I think it covers all the bases of part. And I mean, if we're talking about the legalese style, you need to just have it say the way have things said the way they need to be said to hold up if you have challenges or things like that. But
I guess the one last one, we're not going too late. The one thing that it doesn't really dial in, and this, this might just, yeah. So the question is, if the panel gets put together, is it going to be, and they're not totally on board with whatever the name suggestion is, are they going to feel like they're going to be able to say no in a small community? So if everybody's like super excited, if the community's super excited about this name, but because of A, B, and C, the panel's like, it fits some of the criteria, but not all the criteria. We don't think we should name the whole building after this, flower. But like, is there a way that the panel can say no and not be run over? I don't know. We've been in this panel, or we've been in this policy a little too much, and yeah. Mhm, mhm. Yeah. Mhm. Yep.
Yeah. Well, and
Mhm.
as I understand, it's just a recommendation, right? So it's, as the panel, we're just recommend. We think this is a good idea. We recommend that you,
Yep.
as the council, take this up. So they could say no, and then it still could pass and get approved, right? So, like you said, there's still a way forward. So I totally think if it were me in that position, I think it's a bad idea. Or it doesn't meet the criteria. Yeah, but I don't have a problem saying no, I guess, as a person.
Mhm.
But I would think if I was in that position that I mean, is someone gonna call me and like ask me like, hey, why did you not do that? Probably. But I don't know. I I don't see that being a problem.
Cool.
Joel, I'm just thinking back to what you guys were talking about, the field house naming process, where it's kind of almost named by default, Is it worth calling out with the 20-year requirement being 20 years for a publicly requested name change for an asset? Because I mean, if you build something new like the field house, are we going to wait 20 years before it's available to be renamed? Or I don't know.
I think Anchorage or somebody, they can start their naming process in construction. So like once we got funding for the field house and we got a contract going, then the panel could get put together and start like, hey, this is the construction name, but this is the real name, and it might be the same name at the end.
Right.
I don't know. I don't know if we would go back. I mean, I guess somebody tomorrow or as soon as this policy is in place, somebody could pitch something.
Just a comment, as far as, I know when we were doing Three Friends Dog Park, we were, when you're focusing, and I know the field house has been out there for 20, 30, years. Yeah. So it's been a long time, and a lot of people bond with that. I mean, the community bonds around that. And I know when we were doing the dog park that people were calling it that,
Mhm.
and so they were coming to help at Three Friends Dog Park, and it becomes part of it. So there's a lot of acceptance in that before it ever becomes official.
Yep.
Is that in here where you could do like it doesn't have to be a completed thing? So say we're gonna build a new park at the end of readout open space, like that project gets approved and it's gonna happen, then the naming process could potentially start for a future project, right? When it's announced that that is gonna happen, right? Because then you're thinking we're trying to come up with the name while it's being built, and we're probably not going to approve a name until it's done or almost done.
Mhm.
But say that project goes through and that's the next thing that's going to happen. That's when we can start pitching stuff, and the panel might
That's a good
have stuff.
question.
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
because I'm thinking back to the master plan, and there's lots of things in there that we want to do that have placeholder names or, like
Yep.
you said, working titles. When those potentially go through and might actually start being built, that's when we have to start thinking about the name. So it would probably need to be included in here of
Yep.
when you could start that process, I would assume, right?
Yeah, because West Redoubt would be a great example. It's just raw land. We have hopes and dreams. We've talked a lot about it here. And if we built something, are we going to continue to call it West Redoubt? Like,
Will there be any grandfathering as of a certain date? Would that be, or do we want to set all the names in stone at this point?
yeah, I don't really.
You're saying for stuff that's already named?
Yes.
That's a good point. So you're saying it says you can't rename something for 20 years. Does that mean we could find a park in town that's been here for 20 years and we could go back and rename it? But we can't do that to the current Soldotna Creek Park because of because of
Yes.
when it's exactly right.
Yeah.
So it becomes some technicalities there of like, is it?
It might protect the existing names that are
Yeah,
out
we'll-
there.
We'll see if there's some way we can clean that up.
But with a
Maybe.
policy in place,
Mhm.
new construction or new items probably will fall under the new policy.
Yeah.
So, I'm gonna go back to that community building.
Yep.
I think that the field house is the field house. And because we have a lot of people coming from all different areas to join that field house for a variety of reasons. I mean, you could call it the Soldotna Field House, but to me, that limits it. If you leave that open, it's simple. And so, while I don't mind if I mean, I do mind, I guess, if we change names. What if you name something after a person, then you need to sort of keep that. Otherwise, unless the person did something wrong. But I do believe that, changing things is ridiculous. When I go back to other places, back east or even to Oklahoma where I used to live, they don't keep changing the names every 10 or 15 or 20 years. If you give something a name, I mean, do you get your name changed all the time? Maybe. I mean, sometimes I do with, in-laws. But I think it's important to be consistent to a certain degree and not saying that you'll never change anything, but I think there are things that sometimes we don't change because they work well. If it's not broken, don't fix it.
And I would hope that the panel would be
I
able
think
to,
if the
tease that
existing
out.
names were grandfathered, and then if somebody challenged a name, they could go through this process. And, but they're grandfathered. They would have to come up with some compelling information or reasoning behind it. But that protects the names, however, leaves an avenue for change if found deemed necessary.
All right. Before the next meeting, everyone has to pitch 4 ideas to change
No.
the names.
No. No,
Come up with the brainstorm list.
Karen Street would be the only one. Anybody know where Karen Street Park is? Yeah, exactly.
Aaron Street Park?
Karen Street Park. It's one of your guys's,
I know. I'm trying to think of where it is off the top of my head.
also known as a skate park.
Oh, that's right. I knew. I was like, Karen Street. I know what Karen Street is.
Like, if it doesn't help you identify where it's at,
That's a
then
good point.
like,
Well, no, that's just the skate
maybe
park
that's a
road, dude. I
name
don't-
that, maybe it's just a placeholder name that's been there for 50 years.
Does the skate park? What's the official name of the skate park? Doesn't have
Karen,
one?
Karen Street.
Karen Street Skate Park. Karen Street Park.
Hmm.
Interesting.
And there's a road that goes out to the highway. Done it, I think they can't do that.
Yeah, I don't remember. Okay.
Wow.
Great thoughts. Great conversation. This is exactly what I hoped. So yeah, feel free to shoot us an email if you have anything that you think about tonight while you're dreaming about this, and then we'll see you guys in January.
Telling you, brainstorm list. Got to bring one.
All right. Thanks, guys.